So, good morning, everyone. My name is Isabelle Moulon. I'm a physician. I've been working in this agency since 1995, the beginning of it, and have had different responsibilities here. But my main responsibility has been to develop the interaction with non-corporate stakeholders, so it's patient, healthcare professional, and more recently, academia. And today we want to explain to you how we engage with our 4 key stakeholders, because industry is also a very important stakeholder. And I will explain to you how we will structure this presentation. So we will start with Marie-Hélène with a general overview of how do we structure the interaction with our stakeholder. Then it will be followed by Juan, who will present how do we interact with patient, healthcare professional, and academia. And then we come back to industry with Marie-Hélène. Maybe I can introduce already the speaker, so that will be done. Marie-Hélène is a doctor of pharmacy. She's French, like me. She has an enormous experience in regulatory affairs, but today she represents the corporate stakeholder department, where she's the industry stakeholder liaison. And Juan is a physician as well, a urologist. He has also a huge experience with the agency in a different role, but today he represents the public engagement department because he's the head of this department, and he's also co-chair of the EMA Patient and Healthcare Professional Working Party. So he knows very well what he's talking about, like all of us. But before we start, I would like to draw your attention to the survey, if we can have the slide, because it's a second survey, which is specifically, not this one, the other one, which is specifically directed to academics. Because recently we have developed this framework of collaboration with academia, and one of the action is to investigate the opportunities for mutual education and training between regulators and academics. We believe we can benefit from what you can teach us, especially in the very innovative area where we don't have still the knowledge and experience. But you may also wish to have more knowledge about the regulatory environment. And the purpose is not for you to become regulators. The purpose for you is to know when you have to contact the regulators to make sure that the result of your research can be translated into something meaningful for the patients. So we will do this survey. It's quite short and quite straightforward. We give you the possibility to give a lot of comments. And I would like also to highlight that we have developed this survey together with the what we call the EUNTC. You will see during these 2 days that we use a lot of acronyms. So EUNTC is one of them. It's a European Network Training Center, and we have 2 representatives today. Dubravka here representing the Czech Republic, and my colleague Sheila Kennedy. So if you have any question on this one, you can ask one of them. And we will give you up to the 30th of March, so Eastern, to answer this survey. So for the people who are in the room, you will receive it directly from us, probably on Monday or beginning of next week. For those people who are online, you have to contact us at this email address, academia@ema.europa.eu, if you want to receive the survey and answer to us. So I will stop here, 5 minutes, that's perfect, and I will immediately give the floor to Marie-Hélène, who will start with the overall framework of interaction with our stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabelle, and very welcome again, I think, to this session here organized at the agency. We are very pleased, I think, to have you here and to share with you our experiences, which we hope will be beneficial for you to eventually, use in some ways in your respective member state or at university. In universities. So I'm here to present to you the engagement of stakeholders. And next slide. Here, so I've got that. Sorry. So this, and in order to do that, I'm going to give you, I think, the context, background, and the objective of the principles that we have defined for this kind of general stakeholder engagement. And the reason for that and the basis for this interaction has been embedded into the European legislation. And here there is this mention of the article specifically identifying both the stakeholders type that we needed to have and establish interaction with, but also identifying the need for such interaction. And I'm mentioning that as something which is quite important for from a regulator perspective to have, for us to be able to justify, but also to be accountable for the interaction that we have with stakeholders. So this is a tool which has indeed certain specificities of requirements for us, but also something which is useful for us to use when we have to justify this kind of different interaction. What you can see here from this article and this regulation is the fact that these stakeholders identified from the basis of the agency setup since 1995 is the industry, the consumer, the patient, and healthcare professionals. I know that there are some academics here present in the agencies. This regulation was revised in 2004 and did not foresee such kind of interaction as such with an identified stakeholder. However, there are some other references in the legislation which enable us to develop this interaction, and this will be explained a bit later by Juan. But this is quite important for regulators to see that there is, let's say, importance of regulation to be embedded for the interaction to be established. The other aspect and that has happened with the agency when establishing the stakeholder engagement is that this has evolved over the years, and linked with also the responsibility of the agency being also expanded. And I'm just going to give you some example of that. Martin mentioned at the beginning that we have interacted with patients since the initiation, more or less, of the setup of the agency. And there again, this was linked with the scope of the type of medicines that we had, which was innovative and biotech medicines. And one of the first medicines that was authorized through the agency was an HIV medicinal product. And you can imagine that it was quite important at the time for us to have engagement, and this was something which was both sides needed a need identified to have interaction with patients, and one could also identify sometimes some activists of HIV groups to be, coming to the agency and to have the dialogue. For the same reasons, we have had interaction with industry, as an example, with certain kind, because of our scope at the time, which was, as I mentioned initially, innovation and biotechnology. So again, we had a certain representation of like EFPIA industry and Europa Bio, which was the two types of industry that we have been interacting with at the initiation of the agency's responsibilities. But this has evolved. The scopes of the agency have increased. We have had often regulations which came within the remit of the agencies. And rare disease was some important for us to have also the insight of patient and healthcare professionals discussion. So this has evolved into some expansions of interactions. What also has happened over the years is the fact that there has been within the agency a growth of this interaction and, let's say, different ways of interacting within the agency with the different stakeholders. So it was identified for us to have common principles and also to define some, let's say, coordination and streamlining of such kind of activities. And we did this by defining some general principles which are fundamental for all the interaction we have across the different type of stakeholders. And here I'm going to mention, I think, the ones that we are the most, I think, the most important related to the transparency. And here transparency is related to the openness of the agency, but also the proactivity and meaningful dialogue that we need to have with the different stakeholders. The independence and integrity, this is something, again, which is key to each interaction with stakeholders that we have to establish to have a higher standard possible for professional interactions and conduct, and in line with our agency's code of conduct. Accountability, and this is another, let's say, fundamental principle for the agency, linked with the building of the trust of the decision-making, or the decision that we issue within the agency, to have a broad representation, and this is quite important also for the different stakeholders, so that we can also be accountable for making sure this is taking into account all the different views and perspectives of the stakeholders. And these have been defined with specific eligible criteria for such interaction to be established. Effective communication, and there again, this is, I think, consistency that we need to get also to make sure that we pass the right messages, but also in a timely manner. The time is also quite important in certain activities of the agency. And last but not least, the continuous improvement. Again, as I mentioned, the evolution of the interaction has evolved and is a continuous changes which are happening with our interaction. So we need to monitor, I think, our stakeholder needs. And I think Isabelle just gave the example of the surveys that have been just highlighted to you to contribute in order for us to monitor and to see also how we should develop and emphasize the interaction. So having presented to you the legal basis of the interactions, the general principles of the interactions, we have defined also the different frameworks, because each stakeholder have different specific requirement, and we have to also establish particular, let's say, interactions. So here, this slide is just to show you the different type of framework defined, and we will be presenting that more in detail afterwards, for us and for the agency to be able to interact and involve with stakeholders when we have information to share, when we have to consult stakeholders, when we have to involve them and to cooperate or participate, I think, stakeholder participation to our activities. So this is key to the interactions, to have consistent approach and to establish the best possible stakeholder engagement within the agency. So now I'm going to pass the floor to Juan, who will go into the details of the patient's healthcare professional academic engagement.
Thank you, Marie-Hélène, and good morning, everyone. And thank you, Isabelle, for the kind introduction and setting the scenes. So I'm going to give an introduction of how we have developed the interaction with the first groups to which we look at the beginning, which is patients followed by healthcare professionals and more recently on academia. So as has been said, I think the way it all started, it was after the creation of the agency in '95, very soon, we started interacting with patients. And I have to say that we were open, but it was the patients who really came and knocked at our doors, and it was excellent, indeed, HIV activists who were very much willing and very much prepared to really jump on our discussions and influence decision-making. They were the ones breaking the ice, and I think they were energetic enough to really make this request. But I have to say that even if at the beginning we thought that maybe this model with HIV patients could not be reproduced with other patients, it actually was the case. And other patients immediately came into the discussion and into the table, and we all were able to progress and develop this interaction over time. In 2010, the legislation allowed patients to sit in the first committee of the agency, in the committee for designing orphan medicinal products. And it was also a very key milestone in having patients really involved fully in decision-making, and they are still very active and contributing very much to this committee. Immediately after, all these European patients which were starting to crystallize discussion with us set like a group which made a lot of recommendations on how to progress with this interaction. And all these recommendations crystallized in 2005 with a formal adoption of a framework by the management board. We set up a very clear structure on the way that we, the agency, together with the patients, thought it was the best way to allow them to participate in our work. In 2005 as well, new legislation allowed the patients and also the healthcare professionals to sit as full members in the management board with the same rights as any other member representing member states, which was a clear signal on how much we want that patients are really involved in the direction that the agency has to take. And then in 2006, this informal group of patients organizations were again formalized under this framework in what we call the Patients and Consumers Working Party. This working party met for the first time in 2006, and 12 years later, we continue meeting, and it's a very active group which is guiding a lot in many elements and discussions and policies and initiatives which are going on in the agency. Following on this successful story, in 2011, we have a framework of interaction with healthcare professionals, which was very much looking at the reference of the patients one, but addressing the needs of the healthcare professionals, which were different in the way. And I think it was in 2014 where the agency, the high management of the agency, realized that it was a very relevant activity, and they created a dedicated department which is fully supporting and allowing this interaction to develop, to grow, and to ensure that patients and healthcare professionals are involved mostly in all of the activities that the agency has at the moment. And I think just to give you an idea of what we are talking is that we are now revising, because we report annually, we are revising the level of interaction from last year. And for example, from patients, we have reported, and we are going to report that last year only in 1,000 activities of the agency, some of them really relevant, patients were involved. So I think it's most on everything we do, we consider whether patients can really participate. Last year also, we systematically formalized the inclusion of real-life experience and clinical practice from healthcare professionals in all our activities. And it was also the year when we have the first public hearing in Europe in medicines regulation. The results were extremely good, very satisfactory feedback, and it's allowing us maybe to plan more public hearings this year. So this is just to give an overview, but in order to make this possible, I think it's not up to the agency. It's thanks to the network of organizations which has been created and which are very active in the different fields. And this is just to have an idea. We try to interact with all kinds of organizations, both patients and healthcare professionals, and they create a real network which covers most of the therapeutic areas, but even with allows flexibility to look for patients, experts, healthcare professionals whenever we need and whenever are the needs of the agency. In total, we have more than 60 organizations which fulfill some kind of criteria that we have defined, and which allows us to maybe have a fast-track interaction with them. This is just to give you an image of the different working parties. The working parties are members which comes from these organizations that I saw before. They are a group of 20 members, and I think what is very good is that over the time, the interaction between the two groups are closer and closer. More and more what we are having is discussions where we have regulators, patients, and healthcare professionals. And if at the beginning there was a bit of a reluctance to have joint discussions, patients, and healthcare professionals, what we realized that the issues are common and that they really benefit from each other's views, and definitely the outcome is much more positive like this. What is interesting as well is that these working parties of the agency representing patients and healthcare professionals, they have a co-chairmanship, and one is the agency, but is also a patient representative, and in the case of the healthcare professionals, a healthcare professional representative, which really empowers them on the direction that these working parties are taking. The working parties don't discuss product-related confidential issues. They discuss more general aspects of policies, initiatives, or projects which are undergoing. When it comes to product-related involvement, it's like a different subset, a different way of having patients involved on healthcare professionals. And this is just to show you that we involve them along the life cycle of the medicines, from pre-submission when the medicines are being developed, during the development phase, And for example, I think Agnès mentioned before, systematically we consider patient involvement when we are giving scientific advice to developers. We have them sitting as members of the pediatric committee giving advice on pediatric investigation plans, and also in discussions about designation and classification. When it comes to the evaluation, after a company has made an application, they are fully involved. For example, when we have scientific advisory groups, which is a group of experts that the committee convene in order to answer specific questions about benefit risk, patients are always present in these meetings, and they are always contributing. There are very often specific questions even for them. When there are oral explanations just before having a benefit risk decision, usually they also participate. They are also participating in reviewing and helping us in writing the product information for patients. This is the package leaflet, but also summaries of the recommendations. And when the medicine is in the market, when we are talking about safety monitoring, they are also heavily involved. They are members of the safety committee, but they are also involved in several consultations. They give advice about the feasibility of risk minimization measures, and they review safety communications. They are also parts of scientific advisory meetings which are supporting safety evaluations, and as we said, they participate fully in public hearings, etc. So I think the level of interaction is all across the board. And how we do that? I mean, we have several tools, and as we said, maybe the most sophisticated, the one we are looking with more enthusiasm because it's new, is the public hearing, but we have not to dismiss all the different ways by which we try to discuss with them. We have a lot of face-to-face discussions. We have a lot of in-writing consultations, which sometimes is like the first step before coming for a formal meeting or face-to-face discussions. We more and more are using teleconference tools, video conference, in order to have a fast and easier access and more efficient way to discuss with them several issues. Of course, they participate in the committees as full members, as we said. We use surveys as the one that you are going to be helping us. And we are, for example, involving patients in research activities in order to define, identify patient preferences, which can support data, which in a way can support benefit risk evaluation and decision making. What is important is that the difficulties and one of the challenges that we are facing is that patients sometimes are patients representing organizations which have some kind of regulatory background. But more and more we are looking at patients which have no regulatory background at all, and they are just asked questions which are purely on benefit risk. And this is a challenge in the sense that it can be quite intimidating for a patient, which sometimes is not English, their first language, to come here to London, to the EMA, to be put in a meeting with a lot of experts from all across Europe, and to be asked to answer some questions, sometimes which are of scientific nature. So we need to ensure that there is a lot of elements which are supporting and facilitating this participation. And we have developed what we are calling a training strategy, which we started at the beginning by an annual training day where we train them how to maybe participate in scientific advice. But also what we are doing more and more is to do a lot of videos, EMA basics, online materials, which can be tailored to the different activities so that when a patient comes, for example, for a scientific advisory meeting, they really get a package of information which is going to help them to do it. We have a lot of online information on the webpage, but what we realize is that more and more what is critical for their performance and that they feel comfortable and confident is that there is a one-to-one personalized support for a member of the staff, EMA staff, with experience on helping patients to really perform well. Not perform well in terms that is going to say something clever, no, but they really feel comfortable, they really understand what is the discussions, and they really are prepared to really be able to give their contribution as best as possible. So following what we have developed in patients and the healthcare professionals, what we realized very soon is that there was a gap, there was something missing. Is that even if we have been interacting with academia in a very informal way, there was not a structure which was covering academia. It was a real gap, which is between regulators and academia, and we tried to formalize that and to fill this gap. And I think 2016, 2017 was a crucial moment because, as you can see, there was a lot of reference. The European Council conclusions, they were making very clear that there was a need to facilitate translation to scientific advance to innovative medicinal products. There was a real impetus in this direction. Horizon 2020 already made reference of the important and encouraged initiatives to really engage with regulators as soon as possible. The network strategy of HMA, Head of Medicines Agency, made a lot of clear notes in this direction, as well as the agency were planned. So I think there was the momentum to go for it, and building on the experience, we tried to a little bit formalize what, in a way, we have to acknowledge that there has been interaction between academia and regulators. So I think the idea is to create a framework which was able to support this interaction and dialogue in a more structured, in a more formal way, in a way that we can recognize, that we can report, and which is able to raise the necessary visibility and awareness between the scientific community. We have to make the difference because we focus very much our framework of interaction with healthcare professionals on the clinical side, and here we want to focus more on research and education. Even we have to acknowledge there is a lot of overlapping and common objectives between the framework of clinicians and healthcare professionals and academia itself. So this is just to illustrate that from research and development, from early stages and research development to the moment that we arrive to a medicine which is able to be to offer to the market to patients, there is a often convoluted way which we believe that can be simplified very much if regulatory standards are able to meet very early research and development. And that's a little bit the whole essence of the project. We need to ensure that this interaction comes earlier, because coming earlier, it can help and can a lot of focus all these efforts goes in the right direction. So in that sense, we have the framework of academia adopted by the management board last year in March, and the objectives of this framework is to make it simple, to raise awareness of the work of the regulatory network in medicines regulation, to promote and develop the necessary regulatory support to the academic research in order to be able to provide advice and guidance, and then to work in collaboration with the regulatory network in developing regulatory science. We have developed a specific web page trying to highlight and to provide in an easier way a lot of information, and not only information, resources, which are available to academics, because we are very much aware that one of the challenges that we are facing is that the quantity and the amount of information that our agency website holds is such that it's really difficult to navigate through it. So that's already complicated. So by highlighting it and by putting it in a single place, we hope to facilitate these tasks. So having said that, I think that the whole idea from the department which is dealing with the stakeholders is that we have to promote a multi-stakeholders discussion. And I think at the agency we are very much aware that that's the only way to progress efficiency in the right way. We have to sit together, patients, healthcare professionals, academics, and now Marilyn will complement with industry. And this is just to give you a flavor. Topics which are of high relevance, of high interest at the moment, such as advanced therapy medicines. You will have a session afterwards. We are discussing very much about big data and how big data can support regulatory science. We are discussing how to improve access to product information in digital format, or we are trying to address the issue related to shortage and availability of medicines in Europe. If we want to give a response to these issues, we need to put all the stakeholders on the table together and to be able to progress at the same time. So I give the floor now to Marilyn, and we will have questions. Thank you very much.
Coming back now to give you some insight as to our interactions and stakeholder framework with industry, which one could say indeed that it's one of the key stakeholders identified because of the fact that they are submitting, they are the developers that we have been used to interact with, and also the applicants and marketing authorization of medicines that we are recommending marketing authorization for human and medicinal products. Okay. So who are these industry stakeholders? I think we have to make it clear that the ones we are interacting with are organizations, associations, and parties interacting with the agencies. We have identified interest and are affected by the work that we are doing at the agency and or with our partners. So we are mainly interacting and dealing with trade associations and not directly interacting within the corporate stakeholder department with individual companies, which is the remit of the interaction that, let's say, the business of the agency is dealing with on a daily basis with each individual marketing authorization application which is submitted to the agency. It is important that we have such corporate, let's say, interaction with these organizations, associations, or parties, which are here mentioned. And I would just highlight maybe two of them, which may be even more relevant to the audience here today. So again, the interest that we have to have from this organization is to have their interest in human or veterinary medicinal product. But we have also interaction with association with multiple stakeholder membership, including industry. And I'm highlighting this in particular because we have, and we know that there is some, let's say, academics, we have some interaction with industry. And in that context, that will be regarded from our perspective as a potential industry stakeholder that we will have to obey to the framework and also the specificities of interaction that we have defined and which I will cover afterwards. Something also of importance, it's also organization engaged in early innovation life cycle from development. So there again, there may be some of spin-off companies which may be coming out from academics, and this is something that we will need, I think, to have some discussion to see under which kind of stakeholder category this will fit so that we can see the type of interaction that we can collaborate or interact with. So we have defined this framework for industry organization in order to formalize and structure this interaction because, again, as it was highlighted, this was an interaction which was established since the beginning of the agency setup, and it covers the interactions with the different type of organization mentioned previously, and it enables us also to have a monitoring and reporting, and like the other stakeholders that have been mentioned and described by Juan previously, we have also an annual report where we report on our industry stakeholder interactions. The principles of the interaction are, let's say, similar but specific to the industry is to facilitate and streamline the communication with the industry. There again, we are developing a lot of guidances, and this is something that we need to interact with industry with the appropriate level, but also to get, I think, some awareness. So there is a timely aspect that we need, I think, to get right to make sure that this is also reaching the right audience at the right moment. There is a need of structured interactions, and again, I think you will see some examples afterwards. Accountability we mentioned because of the trust that we need to establish and to demonstrate towards our other stakeholders, and to have the broad representation of the different type of industry association and representation. This is also quite important in our interactions. I'm here, I think, wanted to highlight to you the fact that we have developed, like for the other stakeholders that the agency has frameworks, some specific eligibility criteria. And for industry, we have developed those specifically when we have to involve industry in our activities, but also or have them cooperate or participate to some of our activities. As you can see, this may be sensitive because of the perception it can give. So we need to have the right, let's say, transparency, balance, and the right interactions with industry. Hence this eligibility criteria, which we have developed and we have them published in our website, and after which we have also published, the eligible industry organization that we can interact with. And there again, these are transparently published in our website. So there is full understanding of the organization that we are more closely interacting because of some of the specificities and the need of the agency. The criteria that I mentioned previously, I think, are the 5 which are mentioned here: legitimacy, and again, with the basis of EU-wide representation of the trade association of pharmaceutical industry, and also with the criteria to be non-profit organization. And this is quite important for us to make sure that this organization, when interacting and claiming the need for this interaction, are non-profit. As to the activities, I think we have requested the industry organization, to publish publicly in their mission their interactions and their interest in our activities. And this is something that I think has been the basis for also promoting that from this perspective for these stakeholders. Another criteria that we have established, one could be seen as quite stringent, is the, let's say, need for entry in the European Commission EU Transparency Register. And there again, this is, I think, to make sure that we have this kind of similar requirements and consistency in approach with the industry stakeholders. The representation, there again, I think we want to have a stakeholder representation which represent the industry, but also have in place a two-way dialogue. So it's not, let's say, industry coming to our meetings or conferences or expert meeting to promote the specific, let's say, company's perspective, but they have to make sure that they have there to represent the organization, to feedback the, let's say, a discussion that we had, and also for us to get back the comments that we need from an EU-wide perspective of industry, and not, yeah. So here we will get to the structure, there again, some specificities. There again, I think this is something that we have developed with regard to the importance of topic-driven meeting and targeted consultation. And I'm just giving some example, and we'll let you know. We have developed within the agency the new transparency measures, the proactive communications and the dissemination of, let's say, clinical information. This is something, an activity which is, I mean, globally known, and for the agency to have taken the lead. And in order to be able to put in place such policy, we have had to have very wide consultation of the policy proposal. So this is where we have had to establish some interactions and have huge input, and also follow up of the industry companies, because we were speaking about the data that they were submitting to us, and to have a bit earlier release of this information. New schemes have been, I think, set up, like the Prime, and you will hear a bit more about that one. There again, this is something that we need to get it right, and we needed to get the right interactions and feedback from the stakeholders, industry participants. And this is what has driven the possibility for us to have these policies and in place. And here, these are other meetings of targeted consultations that we have established, where industry is quite key for us to get the right feedback and to also establish new or modify certain aspects of the centralized procedure, to develop the right, let's say, level of R&D development support that are needed for the development of medicines, and so on. So, to finish, maybe because of time, is one important aspect is within the corporate stakeholder department, there is also an SME office, which is specifically, there to provide single contact point to promote innovation. And there is a legal basis for the establishment of such SME office. And here you can see the 6 principles activity which are within this office, and we can expand on that later on if you have any questions. So I think this is just to end the presentation on stakeholders, and I'll give back the floor to Isabelle.
Okay, thank you very much, Marie-Hélène and Juan. So we are now prepared to take some questions, but I have also prepared a slide in order to stimulate the discussion, because, of course, this interaction raised some common challenges for everybody, and there are specific challenges to each of the stakeholders, but we can't address all of them. So I have put on this slide the common challenges, and maybe this is something we can also discuss together in the 20 minutes which are remaining for our session. But the floor is yours now if you have any questions.
Hi, Gilly Spurrier, Melanoma Patient Network Europe. I wanted to know if you actually have some influence over giving advice to clinical trial design to industry, for example, or SMEs? Because it's a question we also ask the FDAs. Do you have some say on useful exclusion criteria, which actually has some relevance in the real world utilization of these drugs? And do you actually have some way of pushing them to say this trial is not going to be suitable for the information that we need for regulators, and then further down the line into HTAs? So we would like to see you having some clout with this.
This is a very good point, which is going to be developed later today. But thankfully, we have a representative of the Scientific Advice Working Party, Dieter de Vos, so he will answer your question.
Yes, so indeed, companies have the possibility to come for scientific advice. Of course, they have to be willing to do that. And when they come for scientific advice, and I have the impression that most companies actually use the possibility to come for scientific advice, indeed, one of the major aspects which are discussed in our working party, sometimes together with the companies in a discussion meeting, is actually the design of the clinical trials. Things, as you have stated, inclusion criteria, exclusion criteria, endpoints, primary, secondary endpoints, and sizes of the trials. So that's, let's say, on a voluntary basis if companies come to do that. On the other hand also, and that's I think more the national authorities, clinical trials have to be acknowledged by the national competent authorities, and also there's a possibility, of course, that the national authorities can intervene and steer these designs of clinical studies.
Maybe just to clarify, Dieter de Vos is member of the Scientific Advice Working Party, but he's not a regulator. He's part of the academic community. Dubravka.
Just to add to that on the national level, or more precisely on the level of HMA, of the heads of medicines authorities network, there is a working group called Clinical Trials Facilitation Group, and it can also help.
I'm Peter Niels. I'm an ex-regulator. I'm an ex-CHMP member. I just wanted to add something what Dieter said. Today, the design of the clinical trials is not under the responsibility of the national authorities. It is under the responsibility of the ethics committees. And of course, if you ask scientific advice at the national competent authority, then you will be steered in a certain way. That's what you ask for. But if you don't, and you have only an ethics committee, and it is a very peripheral ethics committee, no comments.
Okay, I'm Professor Tatiana Benisheva, coming from Bulgaria, and at the Medical University, and also president of local regulatory association. So my question is how the experience at EMA committees is spread out within the agency in the EU. Are there any policy developed? Because some of the agency, they have a local policy, how this information will be spread out within the agency, within the experts. And my second question is, maybe it needs such policy to be developed, and second, how this policy to be after that, so spread out with the stakeholders on the regulatory basis, because some of the meeting and seminars, even with the local agency, they're organized on the private context to involve these experts to be involved and to spread out the information within EMA. I think this should be on some very important, and all these tests should be developed not to be on a chaotic way. I see all this cooperation with and the framework with so many associations, but we need a stable and single process. First of all, on a local level, and how this will be developed with the stakeholder in the countries. This is very important.
I can partly, I think, address the industry, spread of the information and how we communicate to get sure that there is, let's say, impact at national level. Because what we do here, it's Europe, but ultimately it's member states and its patient and its regulators and so on at national level. The thing is, all the activities that we do, and in one way to communicate towards industry, we go through the EU trade associations who have within their membership all the national trade associations from the industry perspective. So we have the assumption, and this has been, I think, fed back to us, that they provide and they spread information in that way as to what we communicate at EU level down to the member state level through their industry trade associations, and then up to them to then have, I think, the consequential activities. With regard to the other way around, because again, for us, it's a dialogue and it's an interaction that we want to have. When we need to have some industry participants, I mean, they, contrary potentially to some of the patients, healthcare professional representatives who come with the EU hat, we have, let's say, participation from the industry who come from national industries nominated by EU trade association. So there again, we are specific in the expertise that we would like to get for a specific dialogue in a guidance document or to have an expert discussion. And we get back, I think, the national, let's say, industry representative of certain companies within the discussions at the agency level. So that, I think, the two-way dialogue or the two-way interaction that we have established, and we expect that to be, and this is why you have seen that this is one of the criteria for us to interact with EU trade organization, is that they have this in place. Without that, we will not accept potentially to have this eligible organization to interact with the agency. But this is, I think, something very important to us to have this, widespread representation and also member state, direct interaction.
Thank you. Maybe just to complement, I think one of the main challenges we are having is the complexity of the European Union in a way. And I think that the outcome of the committees is important, that in order to ensure that it goes in a very coordinated and consistent manner to everyone, we have developed like a coordinating system within the member states. And I think that's a little bit the key element to ensure that we communicate at national level the same messages at the same time. We, in addition, have to support that with the network of patients and healthcare professional organizations, and they are like, let's say, our immediate contact point. We disseminate targeting depending on what is the element of the communication and which is the main outcome. But I think we very much rely on the HMA and the network of member states and national confederatories to ensure that there is a cascade of the information, so that at the end of the day, there is a good connection between what the committees discuss and what is communicated afterwards at national level.
That every agency has developed such policy, because I'm not sure all members are coming from the different countries, and when they go back, I'm not sure that this information is spread out within the agency first, after that to be spread out to the professional association. I think you should develop such policy, because I'm not sure. First of all, Germany has a very good policy, so European, there's something like that, but I'm not sure that every agency developed such policy. And this is important for such future framework, even with the professional and the industry association.
I think it is a very relevant comment, because I think we think we are doing very well, and what is clear is that it's not the feedback we get. We are, for example, giving a lot of emphasis to safety communication. And I think we can say we have a lot of evidence that safety communication, there is a clear policy in place, and I think when there is a safety issue which comes up, the messages that are being provided at all national level are all the same. We are very confident that it is the case, but definitely maybe we need to look at other areas to ensure it is the case. We have improved a lot over the years, and maybe we have to continue doing so. But I think we have to say that we don't see there is much inconsistency in the way that the information is communicated across the countries. But definitely we need to look at in more detail.
Sven Schubert, European Association for the Study of Obesity again. I'm quite fond of EMA's neutrality and impartiality, and hence I was glad to see that the industry interaction is more closely monitored and to ensure that there's no hidden agendas being pushed in on the side. As a patient representative, I'm being approached by industry more than usual, and I'm sure you're aware of this. So there's definitely a development where patients are recruited by the industry. And I would, this is just a suggestion or an idea, introduce the declaration of interests of conflicts for patients as well, because you may end up with some patients who have been groomed by certain industry giants.
Thank you for the comment, because in a way allows us to maybe explain and clarify more on this point, and I think we fully agree. We treat patients totally as any other expert. We don't make a distinction whether the expert is giving scientific contribution or an expert giving point of view of patients or life experience. And we apply the same rules also in terms of conflict of interest and declaration of interest, etc. So exactly the same standards applies to patients as any other expert.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Francesco Florindi. I work for BBMRI ERIC, which is a European research infrastructure connecting Europe's biobanks. So it's a largely academic organization, although with a very practical, real, let's say, base at the national level. And my question is related to your engagement strategy with academia organizations. I feel it's very difficult to find, let's say, single points of entrance with academics. It's a very varied organization, group of people. I wonder if there is a space, a role, a special role that BBMRI, ERIC, but also other ERICs like ECRIN, IATRIS, and so on, can play to facilitate, to help EMA to engage with academics. In particular, looking back at the history of how the European Research Infrastructure Consortia were created. They started as a European initiative, and now they're all independent organizations, but there is a strong connection there. So I wonder, in brief, my question is if there is a plan to establish a special relationship with ERICs, and if so, how would it look like? Thanks.
Well, again, we didn't have time to show everything this morning because it's quite condensed. But you have to understand that here we work at European level. So when we speak about framework of interaction with stakeholder, we speak about stakeholder mainly at European level for the framework. When we discuss evaluation or any other thing, individual expert, they can come from anywhere. But when we discuss with organization, they have to be European organization. So in the context of the framework of collaboration with academia, we have identified European organization, well, organization in quotation mark. And of course, the ERICs are part of this organization we want to interact with in this framework. We want also to interact with the European Learned Societies and any other European institute or organization doing research and education. So indeed, all the ERICs, and we also look at Corbel, we look at BBMRI, we look at IATRIS. They are one of our privileged interlocutor in this context. So it's very relevant. Yeah.
Sorry, Gillies Berry. In relation to your question, your comment you got up there on collecting patient experience and clinical practice data, I mean, registries are absolutely key to this. And I certainly find from my experience in France, where we have quite a big problem with diverse registries not sharing data, I wonder if the EMA can do something to push this a bit more forcefully.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We have some working group. Maybe Agnès, you know that better than me. But this is definitely a topic which is on the agenda, and this is why we need to have more research on this topic. So maybe Agnès.
You will hear probably this afternoon when we do, or tomorrow when we do pharmacovigilance, but we have an ongoing initiative on standardizing the data, trying to work with registries and trying to also make sure that it's a general initiative at the European level with the EU network and EMA, co-chaired EMA EU network on big data, trying to get the information, making sure that we can use the information, that the standard and the reliability of this data is such that we can use them for the purpose of what we do here, either to describe the benefit, but also describe the risks and try to match this. So yes, it's work we are doing. We cannot impose it because we have no rights. And we also face issues with data protection and the rules, which are not going to be, from what I understand, necessarily simpler with the new legislation coming in May. But we are trying to work around to make sure that we can use the data because they are really useful for us.
Just to add that this is an area where patients are heavily involved and they really are fully contributing to all the discussions.
Hi, Steve Anderson from FDA. I was wondering if you could talk just generally about how EMA's budget is generated, and then do you have user fees? And then I'm sort of hitting on some of the points you make here, and then if you do have user fees, how do you sort of avoid those potential conflicts of interest and perception that your work is being driven by industry?
So I send that the
Again,
question
good question.
will get to go to me. The budget of the European agency is around 300 million euros. It's in euro, not in pounds. We receive 90% of our budget, more or less, from fees from industry. But they come to our budget without a label, and we do not have the same rules at the FDA, where you have action under the user fee and other action that you can undertake which are not based on user fee. That is not the same. We actually do cross-subsidizing because we use most of the budget for a number of actions. We build databases on behalf of the EU. We do public health action which are not directly procedures attracting fees, but we also have procedures which are not attracting fees. For example, orphan designation is free. The pediatric development is free. So when companies come to us, we also, aside from scientific advice, we have a number of activities which are discussing with company informally and which are free of charge. So this has to be subsidized by the other, but we do not have the same separation as the US. So it's in a way simpler. This said, conflict of interest is a good point. We have been challenged several times. We're still challenged. We hear that scientific advice, in particular, the SPADITER, is an area where, because we discuss with company, we are necessarily biased. This is a point we need to remind ourselves that we are independent and we are judging what companies are presenting to us, but we are not buddy with industry. We are not on their side, if I may say so. At the same time, we work with them, and good administration means that you also discuss with the people you administrate. So it's a very fine balance between being independent. But what we say and repeat is we have so many people involved in deciding and bringing up the opinion at the end that it's not just one person who makes the decision. It's not the rapporteur. We have example where the two rapporteurs, rapporteur and co-rapporteur in the committee, were positive and the rest of the committee was negative. So at the end, the opinion was negative. So one person doesn't make the opinion. They contribute. The rapporteurs are very, of course, important in the outcome, but they are not deciding on behalf of the others. And we have a process of peer review. We are transparent. We publish the reasons why we're doing certain things. So the only area where, because there is a confidential information, we remain not as open as in other areas. And this is where we are criticized. So it's clearly the evidence that the more transparent you are, the less criticized you can be, because you explain how. But we reflect our scientific advice in our document at the end. So I'm a bit far from the budget, but I think you understand what I mean. And scientific advice is clearly giving a chance to companies to do the right thing at the right time, rather than waiting like the French guillotine, and you let people do the crime and then you cut their head. Here we'd say, let's prevent, let's tell them what we would like to see, what is in, and it doesn't mean accepting necessarily what they propose. Very often the scientific advice say, we don't agree with you, we want this, we want more, we want better, and then we get it. And when they follow the advice, we have shown and demonstrated that they have more chances of having a positive opinion. It's not because we have taken side with them, it's because we have been more demanding and they have followed what we requested.
Can I just, we usually, especially when we have discussions more with general public, we like to say that it's like university fees. Everyone has to pay the university fees, but after paying them, it doesn't mean you're going to get better marks at the end of the year.
All right, so I think we can now close this session. We will stay for the coffee break, so if you have any question, you can ask them to us. And again, I would like to draw again your attention to the survey we are going to do, because it's very important for us to understand in which point you want to get more information from us. Thank you.
Before you go to the coffee, which is just outside, just to clarify, you have two surveys, one which is assessing this two-day session, and another one which is helping the agency work with academia and the stakeholders in general. And also want to introduce my colleague next to me, with Professor Broich, who is the head of the bee farm in Germany, and we will join us for the session, especially on clinical trial, but wanted to attend the whole session. So also, if you have questions to a head of a national agency, please feel free.